I went back to the office and I saw that my senior senator was sitting here at this late hour, and I wanted to come down and keep him company. So I'm glad to be here with you tonight. Proud to be from the West tonight. We had two great senators from Wyoming remembering Malcolm Wallop's service in this body, and it was wonderful to hear their remembrances of him, and I'm glad we were here to share that, being from the West. Like the presiding officer, I spent most of August in our beautiful state, the most beautiful state in the United States, if I do say so myself, in town hall meetings, mostly in red parts of the state, but in red and blue parts of the state. They don't actually think of themselves that way, but that's how Washington would talk about it. And in the town halls, I always start the same way. I say, ask any question that you have, bring any criticism that you have, tell them that I was an urban school superintendent for almost 4 years. It's impossible to hurt my feelings. It's been beaten out of me a long time ago. And then we have a conversation. This time, every single meeting started with somebody saying, what's wrong with you guys? Why can't you work this out in Washington, D.C.? We are struggling in the worst economy that we've had since the Great Depression, and what we see are a lot of political games being played back there. It's a version of a conversation I've heard now for 2.5 years in our state, and then one of the things we get into at the very beginning is the fact that this is the first time, this is not a garden variety recession that we're just coming out of. This is the first time, this last decade, not just this recession, the last decade, it's the first time in this country's history when median family income actually declined instead of going up. Generation after generation after generation of Americans saw their income rise. Median family income sort of shorthand for middle-class family income in this country. It's the backbone of this country. And it's fallen for the first time in a decade as the cost of health insurance doubled on the people that live in Colorado. The cost of higher education went up by 60%, and people are saying, Michael, I have been at my job for this whole decade, and I'm earning less at the end of the decade than I was at the beginning of the decade. And my cost of not, nice to haves, my cost of critical things to move my family ahead, to create stability for me and my small business, like healthcare, like higher education, have done nothing but skyrocket. And I'm going to show you some numbers that are pretty scary that came out this week from the Census Bureau that reflect in numbers what I'm talking about and reflect how profound the structural issues are that we really face in our economy. Structural issues that don't fit on the back of a bumper sticker or a political slogan or during a debate at night on the television set. This week's Wall Street Journal on Monday had an article on the front page with a headline that reads as follows: as middle class shrinks, P&G aims high and low. P&G is Procter & Gamble. There's not a more iconic brand in our country's history when it comes to the middle class than Procter & Gamble. Mr. President, here are some of the things that they make: Crest toothpaste, Head & Shoulders shampoo, Tide detergent, Pampers diapers. I'm glad to be out of those in my house, by the way. Bounty paper towels, Downy fabric softener, Scope mouthwash, Duracell batteries, Charmin toilet paper, Bounce fabric softener. Nobody needed fabric softener before there was a middle class in this country, but they make it. Mr. Clean, Pepto-Bismol, Pringles, Swiffer brooms and dusters. We have that in our closet. Old Spice deodorant, NyQuil cough syrup, Puffs tissues, Ivory soap, CoverGirl makeup. That's what Procter & Gamble makes. That's what they sold to the great middle class in this country for decades. And here's this article that says Procter & Gamble aims high and low. I wanted to read, I'd like to ask that the whole article be part of the record. Thank you, Mr. President. But I wanted to read a few excerpts from it because I think it's instructive about what we're dealing with. P&G's profits boomed with the increasing affluence of middle-class households, I'm quoting, households in the post-World War II economy. As masses of housewives set up their new suburban homes, P&G marketers pledged that Tide detergent, delivered cleaner clothes. Mr. Clean made floors shinier, and Crest toothpaste fought off more cavities. In the decades since, new features like fragrances or ingredient and packaging enhancements kept P&G's growth robust. But what's happening now? For generations, Procter & Gamble's growth strategy was focused on developing household staples for the vast American middle class, said the Wall Street Journal. Now P&G executives say many of its former middle market shoppers are trading down to lower-priced goods, widening the pools of have and have-not consumers at the expense of the middle. That's forced P&G, which estimates it has at least one product. You heard the list of products, so this won't be surprising. At least one product in 98% of American households to fundamentally change the way it develops and sells its goods. For the first time in 38 years, for example, the company launched a new dish soap in the U.S. at a bargain price, 40 years. P&G's rollout of Gain dish soap says a lot about the health of the middle class. The world's largest maker of consumer products is now betting that the squeeze on middle America will be long-lasting. So if you needed any example of what our families are struggling with in Colorado every single day, here is a business plan that's modeled on a perpetually shrinking middle class by a company whose whole business model, in their whole history, was based on a rising middle class. I'm going to skip the next one in the interest of time, Mr. President, and go right to the end because I wanted to show some numbers. This was the conclusion of the article. Quote, to monitor the evolving American consumer market, P&G executives study the Gini Index, a widely accepted measure of income inequality that ranges from 0, when everyone earns the same amount, to 1, when all income goes to only one person. In 2009, the most recent calculation available, the Gini coefficient totaled 0.468, a 20% rise in income disparity over the past 40 years. According to the U.S. Census Bureau. Quote, we now have a Gini index similar to the Philippines and Mexico. You'd never have imagined that, says Phyllis Jackson, P&G's Vice President of Consumer Market Knowledge for North America. I don't think we've typically thought, she said, about America as a country with big income gaps to this extent. I don't think we've typically thought about America that way either. It's fundamentally not who we purport to be, and it's not who we are going to be. But in order to put us on a path that's actually going to produce a rising middle class again, instead of a division among the very wealthy at the top and the poorest of our citizens at the bottom, we're going to have to come together on some pretty serious choices. I know there's been some that argue that this is all a problem that's caused by too many regulations. And I'm the first to say that we should only have the regulation that we need. Or some that say that the threat of any revenue, even at a time when we are collecting less revenue as a percent of our economy than we have over the last 30 years, are saying that any revenue is choking off this recovery. Let me show you something very surprising, Mr. President. This is high-tech Senate stuff. Here are some lines, and I know that people probably can't see the detail at home. You can get it on the website, but let me walk you through them. This blue line, Mr. President, from 1992 to 2010, it's about 20 years. This blue line represents what's called the productivity index. It is the productivity index. And it shows that we have become far more productive as an economy over the last 20 years. And it's not surprising that we have. We have because we have had a technological revolution that has made us more productive. But you see at the very end here, this is where the recession is. Look at what happened to the productivity index during our recession. Because every single month that went by that we were losing jobs, American business was doing what they had to do, which was figure out how to get through this recession and get to the other end. How to wring out every efficiency they could. How to make themselves as productive as they could, and they did. They have. We are much more productive today than we were here. The green line is our gross domestic product, our nation's economy, per capita. The amount of money per person that our economy is generating. Here is an amazing fact. This is where we were before the recession. This is where we are today. Our economy is the same size today as it was before we went into the recession. We're producing about the same economic output as a nation that we were producing before we went into this downturn. I was shocked when I learned those numbers. But look at this. Here is our employment level. Here's our employment level today. We have 14 million people unemployed, but we're producing about the same as we were before we went into this horrible recession. That's a structural unemployment problem. That's not a problem that's going to be solved by slogans. And it's not going to be a problem that's solved by companies that have become much more efficient at what they do. It's going to be solved by companies that are going to be started tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Small businesses, venture-backed firms, people that are inventing the technology of the 21st century, the products and services of the 21st century, not the products and services of the 20th century. That is the only way that we are going to put these people back to work. We could be investing in our infrastructure too. That would help. This line is median family income, which is what I started this conversation with. This is a terrible story. It's not just a sad story, it is a terrible story. That's that line again, median family income. It was over $53,000 in 1999. It's $49,000 today. Almost $4,000 less in real dollars in a decade. And I could have brought another slide, next week I will, that shows that this trend has actually been going on a little longer than that. But think about it. You know, it means that half of the families in 99 were earning less than $53,000 and half were earning more than $53,000. Today, half are earning less than $49,000 and half are earning more than that. These are folks that have done absolutely everything that anybody ever asked them to do. But I don't care whether you're a family or a business, it makes it very hard for you to make ends meet if that's the slope that you're on. And I would argue, Mr. President, that we cannot consume one more decade of this new century with economic policies that are leading us here and expect to have a vibrant middle class. I want to be in an economy where Procter & Gamble has to change their business model to catch up with the rising middle class, not be in a position that they're in today where they feel like they have to bet on a falling middle class.
Would my colleague yield for a question?
Sure, I'd be
First,
glad to.
I want to compliment him on this outstanding speech, and I hope he sends it. The hour is late. Many of our colleagues are on their way home. I hope he'll send it to every one of our colleagues. It's superb. And it's been a joy for me to stay here and listen. The only question I wanted to ask my colleague, we talked about this last night, actually, when we had dinner. Here's another interesting fact amidst so many that my colleague has brought up. It's just a great speech. If you look at that chart from 1999 to 2007, before the recession hit, median income didn't go up.
Exactly.
And that is a question we're going to have to ponder, and we need great minds like his to figure out the answer. Because if you just blame the recession and think it'll come back up, it won't. So the kind of structural changes my colleague talks about are so needed if we're not going to have a continually declining middle class, even at a period of growth. Am I right about that assumption?
I thank the senator from New York. You are right about that. And what you will see on another, not tonight, but another slide, is that we were already on this decline. And you know what? This is not news to people living in our states. It's not news to the people that are trying to figure out how to make ends meet week by week. This is not news to them. It's not news to the people that came to my town halls and said, we cannot afford to send our kid to the best school they got into. Or we sent our first kid to the fancy school, but we can't send our second kid there. They know what's happening to them, which is why they're so upset that we're not getting done what we ought to be getting done. And what you see on this other chart is that this decline was happening already because the economy wasn't lifting all boats, and it was widening the inequality terribly. I've got some things here tonight that talk about that. And then what the recession did was it accelerated that decline. They lost 2.3% of median family income in the recession, which is more than any of the previous recessions going back to the Great Depression. So that's how tough this is. And you're right, if we keep doing what we've done for the decade that led us into this recession, if we go back to those policies, if we readopt those policies, if that's where we end up, we're just going to continue to see this slide. Thank you. I thank the senator from New York. This gives you a sense of the widening inequality that's happened. This is average income, different from median income. And the amazing thing is, while middle class income has been fell throughout this 10 years, average income actually went up. Because a few people at the very, very top of the economy did incredibly well over this period of time, have done incredibly well. In fact, well, I can show, this is the very top 0.1% of our earners. They went from here to up here. And then the top 1% saw an incline. But here's everybody else. This red line down here, this is 90% of the people in America. Their average income was flat. From 1967 to 2006, that's 90% of the people that live in the United States. It's hard to see how people can get ahead under circumstances like that. And it's no wonder that we got these alarming numbers this week from the Census Bureau that shows that there are 46.2 million Americans now living in poverty. That's a 46% increase since 2000. I had to look to make sure I was reading that right. Since 2000. 31 million people in poverty in 2000, 46 million people in poverty today. 22% of the children in the United States of America tonight are living in poverty. Over a fifth of the children living in the United States tonight are living in poverty. And by the way, as a former superintendent of schools, the Denver Public Schools, I can tell you that we're not doing ourselves any favors when the chances of a child living in poverty in this country graduating from college are roughly 9 in 100, which is what their chances are today. 91 out of 100 poor kids in the country can't expect to get a college degree, can't expect to be anywhere but on the margin of our democracy or our economy. I wonder what effect that's going to have on our median family income going forward. The last slide, Mr. President, because I know the hour is late, is one that was in the Washington Post. And I'm not going to bother to describe the details of this, but you can find it on the website, and it's worth looking at. It is worth looking at. But this red line shows, it's the only thing I'm going to talk about on this slide, this red line shows what the bottom 90% of, it seems ridiculous to talk about the bottom 90%, what the 90% of earners in this country earned as a percentage of the income that everybody earned in the United States from before the 1920s to today, essentially. For the vast majority of time, or some majority of time, in the period from World War II, the end of World War II, until the present, the bottom 90% of the earners earned roughly 70% of the income in the United States. A majority of the income, 70% of the income, for a long time. Now they're earning roughly 50%. The bottom 90 cents earning roughly 50% of the income. That means, by the way, that the other 10% are earning roughly 50% of the income. That's how it's distributed. It's a unique moment in the country's history, actually. Uniquely unbalanced. In fact, Mr. President, you have to go back to 1928, the year before the market crash, the year before Black Friday, the year before our financial markets collapsed and put us into the Great Depression, to find income disparity that looks like the income disparity that we face today. You know, in my view, the 20th century represented a period in this country's history of limitless opportunity, limitless economic growth, limitless educational attainment. Our democracy succeeded in generating an economy that gave everybody a fighting chance. And you know, maybe a definition of whether we're giving people a fighting chance or not is whether or not middle-class income is rising or whether it's falling. And now we're in a period where it's falling. And we find ourselves in the position of producing the same gross domestic product we were producing before this recession, with 14 million more people unemployed. The economists tell us that we've recovered, that we're in a recovery. And the technical definition is that we are in a recovery, because the technical definition is based on whether GDP is growing or not. That's a very cruel definition of recovery for the 14 million people that are unemployed. It's a very cruel definition of recovery for a middle class that's getting wiped out because median family income is falling. Look, the people that live in Colorado, notwithstanding all of this, are optimistic. They're optimistic about their communities. They're optimistic about their families. It gets tougher and tougher, but they rise to the occasion. And you know what? That's what they're asking us to do. They're asking us to knock off the political games that seem to be only about Washington and seem to have nothing to do with the challenges that they face. I was pleased today. Today was a good day here. It's been a long time. I was pleased to join my senior senator and about 30 other Democrats and Republicans at an event to say that, it's time for us to think big about solving this country's fiscal challenges and that we're anxious to work together to do it. We're anxious to create a comprehensive plan to deal with it. And we should be taking exactly the same approach on jobs. Getting our fiscal house in order is an incredibly important thing to do to encourage and inspire confidence in our markets and confidence in our businesses, confidence in our local economies. But our work won't stop there. We need to reinvent our tax code so that it's driving innovation and driving a rising middle class. We need to reimagine our regulatory code so it's doing the same thing. We need to educate the children in this country so they can take on the jobs of the 21st century, because the jobs of the 20th century are not coming back. We will be waiting in vain for those jobs to come back. The people in my meetings back in Colorado are demanding, that's the right way to say it, they're demanding that we work together. Our state's a third Republican, a third Independent, and a third Democratic. But they're Coloradans before any of that, and they're Americans maybe even before that. And it's time for us to meet their standard. So tonight we had votes on the reauthorization of FEMA, our emergency agency, to respond to the incredible tragedies that have happened around the country. It got 62 votes. We were able to pass it. We had a vote on the transportation extension, the FAA reauthorization, and I think the vote was 92-6. Democrats and Republicans moving this country forward. That's what we've got to do in order to get this economy going again. And people in Colorado today are saying, we want more of that and less of the bickering, more problem solving and less finger pointing. And my hope is that on an occasion like today, when we actually have made some progress, no matter how limited, that it may give us the chance to move forward together. Mr. President, I appreciate your endurance. Thank you for allowing me to come to the floor to speak tonight. And with that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.